participating in this evening's meeting. It's actually an official board meeting. So we have some procedural things we need to do to open the board meeting. So we'll go ahead and take care of those now and then proceed with our work together. So the first item of business is to do a roll call for our board members. So I'll begin with President Guidry.
Here.
Vice President Hertan.
Present.
Clerk Zhang.
Here.
Trustee Bond. I don't see her logged in yet. And Trustee Chang.
Here.
Okay. And then next would be approval of the agenda. So President Guidry, I'll turn it over to you for that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so we need approval of tonight's agenda.
Second.
I hear a move, Catherine and Cynthia.
Yeah, and because we're back in
we have to
Zoom,
do
it's a roll call. Yeah, so President Guidry.
Yes.
Vice President Hertan.
Peter.
I can
Yes.
read his lips.
Clerk Zhang.
Yes.
And Trustee Chang.
Here. Yes.
Okay. So that's the all the procedural stuff we need to do to begin the meeting. So we were, hold on. Sorry, I
We
should
seem
get
to have a
the,
point of order from Vice President Dunn.
Peter is back.
Yeah, so on what authority are we able to have this on Zoom?
excellent question.
You need AB 361 to have this on Zoom.
I don't know. I'm not a.
So
legal
if this
scholar.
is a board meeting, it's illegal.
It's a special meeting, though. It's not a regular.
Doesn't
board meeting.
matter. It has to be called under the Brown Act or AB 361 modification of the Brown Act. It is not legal to do this meeting right now.
So what do you suggest? Should we cancel the meeting?
You have to reschedule it.
President Guidry, what would you like to do?
Well, I don't want to violate the law, but and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what the law is. So similar to what we ran into the other night at the board meeting, if we have a board member who objects and we don't have a way to legally prove otherwise, then I don't really see any solution short of moving the meeting to another time or place or whatever we need to do to please our board members.
You can pass at the next board meeting, AB 361, and you won't be in this pickle.
Well, that's not necessarily the case, but yeah.
It is absolutely the case. Talk to a lawyer.
We'll talk, we can, but just look, I'm not gonna say it here. Yeah, if you're determined to kill this meeting to prove your point, then we're fine. Then we need to kill the meeting to prove your point. So
It's
that's
not
fine.
anything to do with proving my point. It is following the law. The law says
Okay,
you follow
okay.
the Brown Act
Then
or the modification of the
All
Brown
right.
Act under
I'm
AB
leaving then.
361.
I'm sorry that we can't do this meeting then. I guess we're going to have to close the meeting. The meeting is now adjourned, and I'm sorry to all the rest of the people that have come on. I appreciate you guys being here. It's very nice of you to have taken the time to come, and I'm really
So
sorry that we're not
there's-
able to conduct any business.
There is another option that you can not have it as a board meeting. Two of our board members who are here can leave the meeting and we can proceed with the meeting with two board members.
Okay, I'm okay to leave the meeting.
Okay, I'm gone too.
I can leave the meeting and can I join just as a public? Because I really want to.
You can be a silent observer.
Yeah, I really want to value the commitment and time of everyone here. So,
Right.
and so I would just leave the meeting. if
I will
that-
leave the meeting too, and I can join as just a public or something like that. And
So
then-
it is streaming. If you go to the Gamut website or the district website, it's streaming so you can watch it.
So
Okay.
Can someone send us the link?
Jane, can you take care of that?
Yes, I will.
I'll send it.
And I expect two of the board members staying make a lot of contribution to this meeting, representing the entire board. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
Bye.
Bye. Sorry you guys can't join us.
That's all right.
I think it's important this meeting going on, and then with all the stakeholders, giving the input.
Yes.
Thank you for finding a compromise that allows us to move forward. And I really appreciate that to both you guys. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. So I am going to get the slideshow going. Okay, can everyone see my screen at this point? Okay, and so I'll get the whole screen up in just a moment. But so as I mentioned, we were last together on May 27th of 2020, and that was just a few months into the initial COVID shutdown. Given that it's been a while since we were together and that we have some new members of this group, we want to begin by doing some brief introductions. So we are going to ask you to share your name, any affiliation you may have with our district, and what stakeholder group you represent. We have representatives from staff, the board, parents. We typically have some students, but I don't know that we have any this evening. Community member, member from kind of professional partners or universities, things like that. So I will begin. I'm Mike Grove. I'm the superintendent of the school district, and I represent staff as part of this. So David, you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm David Guidry. I'm board trustee, actually the board president this year. So I'm representing the board at this meeting.
Okay, Carrie, I see you next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carrie Bosco, Associate Superintendent. It's nice to see you all this evening. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, how about Craig?
Yes, Craig Russell. I'm representing community member.
All right. Peter?
I'm a board member.
Okay. Amy?
Amy Williams, I'm a community member. We have two daughters at Redwood Middle School, and I'm on a variety of committees for SUSD.
Great. Kevin?
Kevin Buchanan, the principal of Los Gatos High School staff.
All right. Arati, good to see you.
Hi, this is R.C. Nagaraj. I used to be a board member at the Saratoga Union School District until November 2020. And so I was representing the school district, and I hope I can finish up my representation of that. And I'm currently tuned in from India.
Oh, great. And Tamara?
Hi, yes, I'm Tamara Coe, or Tammy, I go by Tammy. And I am a classified employee at Saratoga High School. I'm an instructional aide.
All right. Terry?
Hi, I'm Terry Schaup. I'm a resident of Los Gatos, and I'm a professor emeritus at Santa Clara University.
Great. Patricia?
Hi, I'm Tricia Sutton, and I'm a teacher at Los Gatos High School elective department, and I'm representing staff.
All right. Mornay.
Hi, I'm Mornay Vanderwalt. I'm a parent of a student at Los Gatos High School. I'm also affiliated with the robotics team at Los Gatos High School.
Great. Liz?
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Lawler. I am a council member for the city of Montecito.
All right. Emily?
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Emily Christie, and I am a staff member at Los Gatos High, representing all the teachers, but electives is my department.
Okay. Mary? Mary, we're not able to hear you. It doesn't look like you're muted, but
There we go. Is that better?
there we go. Yes.
My apologies. Good evening. My name is Mary Lonhart, and I am the principal at Fisher Middle School.
Great. Nice to meet you, Mary.
Nice to meet you.
James?
Good evening, everyone. James Lindsay, City Manager with the City of Saratoga.
And Greg?
Good evening. Greg Louie, Principal for Saratoga High School.
And Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm a parent from Saratoga High School.
Great. Thank you. And I think we got everyone. Jane, you want to introduce yourself? Everyone knows Jane.
Hi, I'm Jane, and I am Mike's assistant and the board's assistant, and I'm Jane. One name, it's like Cher.
Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our purpose this evening and why we got this group back together. So in the 1920 school year, this group met 4 different times with the intent of creating our district's graduate profile. And we accomplished that in our last meeting in May of 2020. We had essentially finalized the content of that. And at that time, we didn't know that we were going to be in a full school shutdown for most of the 2021 school year. And we decided that for 2 reasons, decided not to really move forward with implementing the graduate profile. First reason was all of us were so overwhelmed just trying to run school online and navigate COVID and do all of that, that we just didn't have the time or capacity to implement our graduate profile in the way that we had planned to. And secondly, we didn't feel that it was the right time for us to roll out something like that. We didn't feel like we could engage with our community in the way that we wanted to in rolling it out. And so we're returning to that now to start thinking about how do we begin to roll it out. We had some internal discussions and decided that it had been a year and a half, and as I think COVID has changed much of the world in many different ways. And we decided it would be a good idea to get this group back together just to kind of review the work that we had done and to sort of assess and affirm that our graduate profile in terms of the content of the graduate profile is what we make sure it's still relevant in kind of this, I'm not, I guess I've stopped saying post-COVID world because we are not post-COVID yet, but we are back in person at school. So really the purpose tonight is to review our graduate profile competencies and descriptors to kind of ensure that they're still relevant and make sure that we don't feel differently about anything we created or feel there are any gaps based on where we are right now before we begin to take the next steps, and then also to talk a little bit about our next steps. So that kind of sets the stage for what we will do this evening. We have primarily most of the evening we will spend doing some small group work and then some whole group discussion. But first, Carrie is going to review sort of what we have done up to this point, because we do have some new people and it's been a year and a half since we were together. So just want to kind of remind what we have been doing. So Carrie.
Thanks, Mike. So this graphic, those of you that were with us in our earlier meetings, you've seen it before. It outlines our 4-meeting process in developing our graduate profile. In meeting 1, we started talking about the why, and we talked about landscape shifts. We looked at societal changes, workforce and employment, meaning in technology, and then we talked a lot about human interaction, that high concept, high touch. We watched the World of Work video, you may recall, with the robots, and looking at how employment for our graduates will be looking over the next number of years. We also talked about fundamental shifts in history of American education, and to set the stage for why did we want to go through this process. Then in meeting number 2, we started to get into what do we really want for our graduates? What are our hopes, our dreams, our aspirations? What competencies would we like to see them develop? And we grounded our work as a task force in Angela Duckworth's Grit in the Greater Good article and video. And some of you remember that she talked about strength of heart. And that was all about gratitude and empathy, honesty, social, emotional intellect. We also talked about strength of will, about optimism, growth mindset, and grit. And then we talked about strength of mind, intellectual characteristics such as curiosity and creativity, open-mindedness, and humility. And that began our work in developing our competencies. We worked in teams and created recipe cards for each of the identified competencies. What do they mean to us when we say creativity or collaboration or curiosity or empathy? And then in meeting 3, we got deeper into drafting our competency definitions. We also looked at samples from the Battelle Network and other districts who had gone through this process on behalf of developing graduate profiles for their districts. And then finally, in meeting 4, we reaffirmed the competencies that we identified, but we ended up adding a 6th competency at the time. We added collaboration. We looked at some visual samples, and we talked about talking points for our students, for our parents, and for our community about why we had gone through this process and how we had identified our competencies. And so Mike will review those with you one more time on the next slide.
Okay, so on the next slide are the list of 6 competencies that we developed. And if you recall, the competencies are the kind of qualities or characteristics we feel are most important for our students to have when they leave us upon graduation. And we were initially trying to state a 5, but we weren't able to. And so we ended up with 6, and the 6 that we developed were critical thinker, ethical, empathetic, resilient, collaborator, and effective communicator. And each of them, at the end of it, we had sort of a bulleted list of qualities or characteristics that were our descriptors for each of the competencies. And those descriptors we formed into, we had discussions about what did we want those to look like. And we kind of not had 100% consensus, but generally we felt like we wanted them to be in kind of student I can statements or I do statements. And so the descriptors are written there in terms of sentences, and they tried to synthesize the kind of bulleted descriptors that we came up with. So for critical thinker, the descriptor is I analyze and synthesize information to arrive at evidence-based solutions to challenging problems. For ethical, I demonstrate honesty, integrity, and respect for all people as a local and global citizen. For empathetic, I seek to understand the diverse experiences of all people through care and compassion. Resilient, I utilize a growth mindset to persevere and adapt in the face of challenges. And collaborator is I work effectively with others to leverage individual and collective strengths and arrive at improved team outcomes. Finally, effective communicator is I articulate clear ideas, engage in respectful and inclusive discourse, and listen actively. So those were the kind of final, the final language that we came up with. What we are going to do this evening is kind of revisit both the list of competencies and descriptors and have some discussion around those. I want to kind of stress that honestly, our goal is not to add new competencies or to create, because that was a pretty involved process where we did a lot of thinking and looking at various sources. And I want to honor that. Our goal is really to kind of think about, all right, given that the changes that we've undergone over the last year, year and a half, do we feel like these competencies are still the appropriate competencies? And then if there's any feedback on the way that we describe those competencies. So we will be doing that in some activities that Carrie is going to lead us through. So Carrie, if you want to take over.
Thanks, Mike, and then hit the next slide. So we're going to break out into the competencies. So we're going to have groups meet on each of the competencies you just heard. And what we'd like you to do are discuss these guided questions. I'm going to show you a worksheet in just a moment, but is our competency still a relevant priority? Why or why not? Is the descriptor still appropriate? If not, what are some suggested changes? And then we'd like your group also to talk about all 6 competencies. And do you feel that we're missing any concepts that have emerged since 2019? And if so, identify any that you believe to be more important than the current 6. So as Mike said, we'd like to stay at 6. So if your group comes up with some suggested additional competency, what would be the priority in that list? So Mike, would you be so kind to pull up that worksheet? I can show you all. You're going to be sent to breakout rooms, and we'd like you to please assign a note taker, facilitator, and then also someone who would be kind enough to share out when it's time to share out. And we have a little worksheet for each of you, and you put that in the chat. It's also in our master document,
which I'm putting in the chat right now.
Perfect.
So in the chat is a link to a master document, and in that document are links to the various groups. So once you've been assigned and pushed into a group, you will click on the appropriate competency there, and that will open up your document. So hold on, I've got so many windows open right now that I. Okay, can you now see that?
Yes, thank you. So each group will have a competency. So this is an example of the critical thinker group. It has the questions that we just reviewed. We'd like you to list your group member names at the top. Again, designate someone who in Google Drive will be a note taker and facilitator for your work session. And there's 2 pages here. The top page has to do with the critical thinker competency. And then the second page down below it has to do with the question related to all 6 competencies. So we want you to have a 2-part discussion, one on the competency your group's been assigned, and then a second part of the discussion would be about all 6 of those competencies. And then when we come back, we'll do a share out. So if you'd be so kind to identify again someone who would be willing to speak for your group, that would be great. We're going to give you about 25 minutes in those breakouts to work through both questions. So if you can spend about half your time on the top part and the other half of your time on the bottom part, that would be great. So it's currently 6:26. Mike, are we ready to push out?
Can I just interject for 1 minute? We only have one person in group 5. So
Yeah,
Mike
so-
and Harry, if you could join that group maybe?
Okay.
Well, we have a few things. We pre-assigned the people who had RSVP'd yes that they were coming. We have pre-assigned you all to groups. We have had some other members who joined us tonight, and so they've not been assigned a group. So we're going to hit push. Those of you who have been pre-assigned are going to get pushed into a group. Those of you who have not are going to stay here, and we will individually kind of sort you into groups. So So Amy, oh, it was just taking a while. Why hasn't Kevin left?
Left where?
He's still in our main room and he should be in a breakout. There he goes.
Oh, yeah, I think it just they're taking a second, I guess. Because he was assigned to that one, so he was under the name but hadn't left yet. And so it looks like there are 3 people left in the room.
Oh, Teresa joined?
Teresa did join.
So now we have 3 board members.
Do you need to move to that breakout room to talk to her?
Yeah, in the breakout room, there's only one of her. Maybe when we come back to the meeting, we can address that issue.
Okay.
Carrie, could you send me the PowerPoint, please, just separately? Cynthia and Catherine would like to look at it. They're having a hard time reading the screen.
So Chrissy, is there a way for me to, because every time I hit present on the slide deck, it fills my entire screen and I can't see my notes. And if I hit escape to get out of that, it goes back to a non-presenting mode.
Are your notes on the actual PowerPoint itself?
No, they're on a separate document.
I don't know. Let me see what I can find out. Give me a second.
Otherwise, I guess could have somebody else share the PowerPoint. So Carrie, do you want to jump into a few rooms, just make sure they're doing okay? You want to take critical thinker, ethical, and empathetic, and I'll take resilient, effective communicator and collaborator.
Mike, I don't have co-host rights to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Should I drop off as a co-host?
Because I can't right now assign you as a co-host.
That's okay. Jane, do we have at least 2 or 3 people in every group?
Yeah, we have
Yes.
3 in all, in 5 of them and 2 in one of them.
Did Carrie need to be a co-host?
If you could do that, yes.
All right, you should be a co-host now.
Thank you. Mike, what 3 did you say?
If you take critical thinker, ethical, and empathetic, I'll take resilient, effective communicator and collaborator.
Got it.
Hey there, Michael.
Hey, Lorenzo, how's it going?
Good, good. Sorry for the delay. It's caught up on
No
a couple other things.
Everybody's in breakout rooms right now.
Okay.
For about another maybe 5-10 minutes, I can push you into one and you can
Oh, that's
join
okay.
in.
I could come back in about 5 or 10 minutes. Then. Don't worry about it.
Okay, maybe I think
At top of the hour.
at about 6:55, we're going to bring everyone back in, I think.
All right, perfect. I'll be back in then.
All right, thanks.
All righty.
Michael, what slide do you want your deck on?
Sorry. When we come back out of breakout rooms, it'll be on slide 6.
Okay, I'll get it there.
Thank you. Okay, I think everyone looks like they are back. Hope you had good discussions, and Carrie's going to lead us through some conversation about what you all discussed in your groups. Carrie, are you back?
I'm back. And I think,
Okay, there you go.
I see we have 22 participants joining us again. And so at this time, we'd like to do our share out. So I think we'll just go ahead and go in order. Group number 1 was critical thinker. If we could start off with your group, that would be great.
Peter is going to share out for us.
So we wanted to revise the definition of, or the explanation of critical thinking to put more emphasis on students having the skill to evaluate the quality of the information that's being used. So certainly evidence-based decisions, but you definitely have to have a skill to evaluate the source of the information and the quality of the information. So that was the major change of the current definition. And then in the other question having to do with what's missing or what would we change on the others, there are 2 changes. One is to put greater emphasis on global citizenship, and instead of having that a sub-item within ethical, to maybe have that be the name of that skill, that is global citizen, and within that it's ethical behavior, and then perhaps to include what we saw was a missing skill, which is environmental stewardship. So it may be that ethical and environmental stewardship become parts of global citizen. So that would be the change to the other skills beside the critical thinking.
I think we also talked about in critical thinking that instead of some of the wording in the definition, instead of being to arrive at evidence-based solutions, it would be to somewhat apply evidence-based solutions, because the shift to application of knowledge is something that we've seen in recent years in education. It's not just about teaching in a vacuum. You're teaching now them skills that they can apply.
Yeah, and that was a consequence of saying, okay, instead of trying to say another skill will be leadership, because it's a small percentage of the population that would be the leaders, it would be that that information is not just there for you to appreciate, but it's there for you to apply to bring about change where it's appropriate. That you have the confidence and the skill and the understanding to do that.
So just for clarification on question 3, you're not suggesting that we change our competencies, but we find ways to weave in some of these other concepts into the existing competencies?
Yes, I think we can do that. If we change ethical to be global citizen, then under global citizen, we would add environmental stewardship. Actually, no, I think we did ask to provide one additional one, which is wellness. I think I might have missed that, to bring about life balance and improve mental health. That wellness is really covered in any of the existing ones.
We thought it might apply under resilience. It might come under resilience.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, that's true.
But we also thought if we wanted to make room for another one, you could coordinate, you could combine collaboration and communicators, whereas communication being part of collaboration. I know it's too much.
So we had quite a bit of conversation about that during 2 meetings, and the group had pretty strong consensus that they were different things and were both important.
I love the concept of bringing wellness into this descriptor for resilient. We're hearing so much about that, and we're reading so much in the literature about the importance of balance and our physical and mental health and well-being. So thank you for that suggestion and question number 3. Anything else from this group?
No, but your comment about communication might apply to this issue of wellness under resilience. So it may warrant a separate discussion. Are those separate items, or is it reasonable to say that wellness is one of the components that you want under resilience?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, our next group is ethical.
I got to be the spokesperson, but my people are going to chime in. For question one, we felt that the topic of the competency of ethics is still as relevant or more relevant than it was 18 months ago when we cast this thing. So we would argue, I think, to leave it in, although some of what you've said is it rows versus columns when we do this matrix that show that how all of the competencies are linked together. For question number two, we thought the description was still relevant, but we got into a little conversation on how do you measure it? How do you know if in fact you've instilled a sense of ethics and integrity in the students? And we came up with a couple things that I wanted to share with you. One is that they do a one-page reflection paper on a situation where they have observed either ethical behavior or not ethical behavior, and what did they learn from that. We also suggested that they may look back and reflect on who were the role models that they recognized in their teachers and the leaders in their school or in their community who were the people who had those values that we think are most important, and why and how has that impacted their life. And the third thing we talked about was if they're doing a service project, how can they reflect on whether or not that gave them a sense of respect for people who are different than themselves, either different because of their ethnic background or their age or their diversity in whatever way. They need that respect for others, and that was in the descriptor, the term respect for people, all people locally and globally. So those were the things I think that we picked out as really important. We also talked about not only respect for individuals, but also respect for codes of conduct or norms in society or norms in their school system or whatever it happens to be. Can they reflect on that and so we can show a metric that says yes, they have done that and they have seen what it really means to be ethical in the settings that they have been in, whatever that setting is. The third thing that we talked about, and I'll give my team a chance to correct whatever mistakes I've made in reporting in, is that yes, we thought, like the earlier group, that collaboration and communication might possibly be merged together. And when you do that, you might even insert the term creativity in the descriptor, because creativity is the driver of collaboration for problem solving and is one of the drivers for effective communication. You have something worthwhile to say if you have a creative approach to problem solving. So we kind of knitted it all together in that way, and I'll be happy to have my team members chime in on those things that I've either said wrong or not enough.
Harry, you did perfectly, and the headset and the background only added to the presentation.
I agree. I vote confidence that you just represented us very well. Thank you.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that, Terry. And I'd love that your group started talking about how to operationalize the competencies, because that's where we're going to have to go with this.
You got to measure it if you want to show that you're making progress.
And I saw your colleague, Mr. Lorenzo Gamboa, joining us, and I just want to thank Lorenzo. He joined us for another meeting a couple of weeks ago around our curriculum alignment project. And I recall, Lorenzo, you were talking about the pillars that you're looking at as an admissions officer at Santa Clara University. And as Terry was talking about how we might operationalize these competencies, I was reflecting on what you were sharing with the group. Did that resonate with you too?
Completely, and just goes to show that I learned really well from Mr. Schubert.
Well, we're thankful to have you both, and also Heather Latimer from San Jose State. It's very helpful as we're talking about graduate profiles to talk with folks from higher education and from our schools themselves. Thank you to the teachers who are attending, as well as parents, and everyone that's here this evening. Our next group was empathetic.
Okay, I think that that belongs to me currently. So we started out by saying, yes, this is more relevant than ever. And we dived a little bit into the problems caused by groups of people being in their own bubble and not really trying to understand others' perspective. And we came up with one of the biggest issues facing the world and this country is the lack of understanding of the unique perspectives and life experiences of others. Being empathetic makes it easier to communicate with others and to find common ground to successfully address the issues we face. So that's a way of justifying, yes, this is still really important. We then tried to say, well, is it just empathetic, or do you really need to understand your own positionality with regard to other people? In order to understand others, you have to first know where you are. And it's a little tricky to try to put that into the description, but you have to know where you're coming from and recognize your position. I tried to avoid using the word privilege, and I don't think that belongs in here, but understanding your own position with respect to others is also important. So maybe self-reflection, saying, understand and value others' experience with regard to my own. And we didn't get very far, but it's in the document that you shared with us. And number 3, we started to look at one of the topics of resiliency. Resiliency is good, but it also requires problem-solving skills, and it needs adaptability. Resiliency involves questioning where you are, what is happening, analyzing the answers. Sometimes the biggest issue is getting the right question, asking the right question. And if you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to get the right answers to analyze. And then once you've analyzed it, synthesizing this possible solution, synthesizing what your response is to that. And I think I'll open it up to the other folks on the team who were also discussing this with us.
So I think we were also thinking about critical thinking, and in that definition, we were thinking of adding questioning to that. Other members help me out.
Yeah, I think we did want to add the idea of asking those questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. So part of critical thinking is asking questions, analyzing the information you get, and coming to reasonable deductions from that. And then I just wanted to add on the resilient piece, I think we wanted to expand resilience to include adaptability. Was that something that we discussed as well? Was not only is it important to be resilient, but it requires to be adaptable. And so teaching students how to kind of game theory scenarios, A, B, and C. So you have plan A. If plan A doesn't work, you can go to plan B, or you can go to plan C. It's being able to think in a bigger picture and be able to have more control over your outcomes. Suppose I just gone through that in there last minute, but yes, adaptability. Thanks.
And your response.
Yeah, so I did include the shorthand version of those two things in the document that we shared with you.
Yep, I see them there. Thank you.
Okay.
And one thing I want to note as we're having this conversation, the descriptors that you see are intended to be short, one sentence, sort of holistic kind of general definitions. And if you recall, part of our next steps is to sort of bullet out much more detailed descriptors of that. So the feedback you're giving on these in terms of, what else needs to be included in the descriptor is good feedback for us as we, look to kind of better define those with specific characteristics and qualities. But in terms of what we were trying to create was for a one-pager, we can't have this list of 9 different characteristics for each one of the competencies. So it was an attempt to kind of just generally define it, and then the next step would be the page 2 would be for ethical would be a more defined kind of list of qualities and characteristics, which I think allows us to hit some of the things you're including here. Okay, Carrie, you ready to move on?
Okay, our next group is resilient.
All right, so I'm on the hook to do the readout. So yes, to question 1, yes, even more so than before, covers adaptability, and that was actually just brought up, and flexibility, which were critical during the past 18 months. Still an important competency so that you can handle differing work environments and people, the rapid change of the job landscape, society in general, and technology makes this a critical competency. Question 2, we felt it is a great descriptor. We didn't think it needs any change. To echo what Mike just said, the wording in the descriptor allows it to apply in a variety of ways to match the particular needs of the students, as each competency will ultimately resonate differently with each student based on their situation. For instance, growth mindset shows a willingness to be open-minded. And then for question 3, we are happy with this list as it does a good job of encompassing the key attributes that we would like to see in our students. Also having these competencies, we believe, will make all our students very successful in life. And that's it. I don't know if the group wants to add anything else.
I think you did a good job of covering it. I think we tried to kind of recognize some of the comments that have been made in some of the previous groups about the flexibility aspect and adaptability. We absolutely saw those as key parts of resiliency. And, so I think that we did feel it was well captured with the way it was described so far.
Okay, group 5 is effective communicator.
That would be my group. So the answer to question 1, we had an emphatic yes. We said that in this day and age, with regards to social media and the difference of opinions and being able to discern fact from fiction, the need to effectively communicate is as essential as ever. And our young adults need to develop the ability to interact with others, listen actively, and engage respectfully, especially when there are differences generationally, culturally, etc. There is an importance of being able to stop and understand before feeling compelled to respond. That's that whole piece of active listening. Similarly, in the written communication needs to be developed in a way to ensure clarity of point, engaging respectfully and valuing inclusion, diversity, equity, and belonging. And this also appeals to social media communication and digital literacy. We connected this a lot to the isolation that came about due to COVID and how it negatively impacted the social development of our students. And as they wear masks, as our students continue and they interact with each other, they're losing the ability to better understand the nonverbal cues and facial expressions that are critical to understanding emotion and intention. So yes, we think that it is still appropriate. However, we would like to include and have some clarity around the written word, that is speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Because when you say communicator, the first thing comes is the spoken word. So if we can, so we went ahead and we said, okay, how do we define this? Trying to keep in mind Mike's rationale for keeping it to a simple, short sentence. We tried. We said I articulate verbally and via the written word clear ideas, engage in respectful and inclusive discourse, strive for mutual understanding of another person's perspective, and listen actively and empathetically. This kind of weaves into the other pieces as well, but it's definitely all gets combined in being an effective communicator. As far as question 3 about adding anything or reading, we said resilience should include learning from mistakes, growth mindset, etc. And then logical thinking could also apply to the critical thinking side as well as collaboration, because that's also important. And the last piece, we were discussing about social gratitude and appreciation that could fall under the empathetic bucket is, Greg gave an example of before COVID, attendance at football games wasn't as much, dress up day there was not that much participation, but now that school is open and people are back, there is much higher participation and engagement. And it's almost like people were starved of it for a year and a half, and now they appreciate so much more. So that whole social gratitude and appreciation is really important. Did I miss anything, Greg?
Oh, you did great. Thanks, partner.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
And I can just add a little thing, Carrie, here that, we were talking principal to principal, one in Saratoga and the other one in India, but we find that there are a lot of similarities in this. So it's there's some universal truth to all of this. So,
well, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And thanks for the
My
report
pleasure.
out.
What time is it there, RT?
It's 8:45 in the morning on Friday morning.
Not too bad.
It's not too bad.
No.
Not too bad. No.
All right.
No.
And our last group is collaborator.
Excellent, thank you. I had an opportunity to partner with Emily on the collaborator. And just very briefly to read that out, the descriptor is I work effectively with others to leverage individual and collective strengths and arrive at improved team outcomes. And we wholeheartedly agreed that this is still very, very relevant. The stay-at-home orders really separated and isolated students. And I think we've been hearing a theme here through each of the competencies that having the students back in person, especially to communicate, collaborate, to critically think, is now more important than ever. So definitely very much still a priority. Similar to other statements that we've heard this evening, we saw some connections between communication and collaboration. Somewhat of a dependency between the two. To be a good collaborator, one definitely needs to have those communication skills. And so I think I have heard that this is not a new concept of considering the relationship between the two competencies and whether or not it's worth combining them or not. We'll leave that to the group to decide, but definitely there is a connection between the two. When we get to question number 3 on what does it look like as we take all the competencies and then consider what we've been through, are there any other changes or any things that we should be considering? And one of the things that we definitely witnessed in this past year and a half is the unique challenges that this pandemic posed to all of us and the creative problem solving skills that were needed. This is something that none of us have really ever experienced before. So we really couldn't take, past experience or, evidence-based stuff and apply it to what we needed to be successful in our day-to-day lives, during this past year and a half. So that creative problem solving, should that be considered as a new competency? We'll throw that out of this group for discussion and consideration. When there's really not an experience or evidence-based path, how do we forge through that unknown? So, Emily, was there anything there that I missed or that you wanted to emphasize?
No, thanks, James. I appreciate it. Thanks for sharing out.
Thanks. That really resonates with me. There was no playbook for us on how to do this. So
Yeah.
that ability to problem solve, that has a different meaning, I think, when faced with new situations. So that concludes our group share out. And now Mike will talk about next steps.
Before we move to next steps, there were a couple of suggestions around, because what I want to leave our meeting with tonight is kind of consensus, or the idea of coalescing around what are the descriptors. We got a lot of feedback and we can work on those, but I want to leave tonight with consensus around what are the 6 competencies. And the last group had a suggestion of potentially adding a 7th of problem solver. I'm very hesitant to keep adding competencies because I think the more competencies we add, the less likely we are to actually be able to achieve them. And all of the advice we've been given by other places is to keep it, 4 to 6. My thought on the problem solver is, we have problem solving kind of built into the critical thinking. And so that one way we could do that is to sort of flip it and have the competency be a problem solver, and that the critical thinking, the synthesis, the analysis could be part of the descriptors that lead to that. But wanted to kind of throw it out there for thoughts. And then we had some other groups that kind of talked about maybe merging particular things. And I would like to have kind of agreement on what the competencies are. So, thoughts on the problem solver versus critical thinker?
One comment, Mike, is that we seem to be somewhat limiting. We are limiting ourselves in the descriptors. We're coming up with these overall competency titles, subtitles, whatever you want to call them, and they're quite rich. And there's a lot underneath them. There's a lot embedded in each one of them. That by limiting it to one statement in the descriptor, it doesn't encompass all that competency embodies. So right. I'm wondering if we might be able to expand the descriptor to the descriptors to be able to encompass all that is embodied in the competency.
Yeah. It seems to me that at some point you are going to drill down deeper into each of those descriptors, and there will be some narrative that'll go with it. I'm reminded that we got into one of these competencies, empathetic, because we were seeing a lack of empathy in the community and in the world, and that's gotten worse. And there's a very good book by Arthur Brooks, you may have read it, but he said there is a culture of contempt that is beginning to emerge, and it's causing the division that we're seeing. So it's not just empathy, it's this culture of contempt that says we see others who disagree with us not merely as incorrect, but worthless and defective. And that's the next step that you would drill down to in terms of empathy. It's not just enough to be empathetic. You've got to be able to be listening to other people, even if you don't like what they're saying. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean they're worthless, and it doesn't mean they're defective in some way, because that's going to drive us further apart. So when you start drilling down, you might look at that particular book and see what it has to say.
Terry, could you put that into the chat?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. And Kevin, to address your comment, that's exactly sort of the next step. Our group was to identify what are the key competencies and to come up with a general descriptor of that competency that can go onto a one-page graduate profile. The following steps are that we would have a separate page for each competency, and it would have a bulleted, drilled down list of kind of more specifically what we see as the kind of specific qualities and traits for that competency in more detail. And then one of the steps is also to then take that framework and ask our teachers to say, okay, this is generally what ethical behavior looks like. But in our content area, what does it look like to be, how do ethics and what does ethicality look like in the discipline of chemistry, and figure out how it applies to that. So this is the very first step in what I see as a multi-step process of further defining these.
For purposes of measurement, would we be creating a rubric eventually?
So you're getting into next steps, but yes.
Sorry.
So I guess going back to the original question of, we have our established 6 competencies that the design team created over a series of 4 meetings. Do we believe that we need to change or adapt any of those? Liz, I think you had your hand up, and then David.
I do. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say that this list of competencies are outstanding, and I think you've done some really great work narrowing down exactly what they need to be, and the idea that they will be expanded at the next step is great, because then you can really encapsulate everything. I really like critical thinker. I think critical thinking is very, very important for our students to be able to process and intake information and think about it critically. And I think problem solving can be attached to that, but critical thinker, I think, is still very, very, very important. I really like the global citizen with ethical and environmental stewardship, that might be able to encapsulate even more within that ethical sphere. And then all the other ones I think are really great, including the wellness component of resilience, and the complete effective communicator verbally and reading and writing. And you just encapsulate all of those as well. So those are my 2 cents, but I really like what we have. And I think you guys have all done I think we have done a great job getting there. So thank you.
David?
Yeah, I think Liz probably said most of what I wanted to say very well. I think and she said it in the comments too, right? The critical thinker and problem solver there's a distinction there that I think is really important that we keep. I think problem solver is great, and it's good that we brought back some discussion around creativity, because that one is really a struggle that we don't have it on the list, and I don't have a good answer for that. But I just would hate to see us change the terminology from critical thinker to problem solver. I think even more today, like what Terry was talking about, it's really important that our students be able to understand not just what people's opinions are and how they're doing, but where they're coming from, understand what is really a fact and what is an opinion, and be able to make those distinctions and to be able to understand that level of nuance. And I think that's a critical part of being a critical thinker. And I think if we change the name to problem solver, then we kind of, it's easy to drift away from that and to focus on other aspects of solving problems, rather than making sure you really understand what the issues are and why we're at the state that we're at before you get in and trying to solve it. I think a lot of these issues that we're facing today as a country are not things to be solved. There are things to be understood, and you can't do that if you don't really get in depth to the critical thinking of what's going on and understand it in that level. That's just kind of the feeling I have on that particular one. And that was all I wanted to say there.
And the creativity thing, if you recall, as we were trying to narrow, we had a longer list of competencies, and creativity was one of the ones that was kind of in the on the bubble, if we would say, if you recall. And we the ultimate decision of the group was to not have it be its own competency, but try to weave the concept of creativity into some of the other competencies. So maybe that's another kind of aspect. I'm sort of taking notes and see if we can incorporate that a little bit more into, as I'm looking at, as I'm looking back at notes from our previous meetings, the ones that were kind of on the bubble, that creativity, adaptability was there, global citizens, leadership. So those were all right there. And ultimately the group decided to go with the 6 and try and weave some of those other things in. So Lorenzo and then Peter, look on the other page. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. No, I just wanted to, again, comment on everybody else's critical thinking versus problem solving. I completely agree with you. They're both fundamentally important. However, I think what I'm trying to gain to is how are our students going to understand the difference between these two? And the way that I'm trying to I guess, pull it back would be to say that you need to understand how to, get through all the issues, because I think when you say problem solving, it means that you understand what are all the issues on the table and how do you tackle that issue. Critical thinking is that you have to brainstorm what are the issues, how are you going to get to that point to solve the problem. And helping them, I guess, like if I was trying to teach somebody who's coming in as a first year in high school, would be to say, it's the difference between trying to be an engineer with only algebra underneath your belt or trying to be an engineer when you have differential equations underneath your belt.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Peter and then Tamara.
So this operational suggestion for a future discussion, and that is if we want to limit it to 6 right now, competencies, then maybe put some notes about how best to boil it down to the essence by such as we were talking about, well, where does problem solving fit? And similarly, I felt that leadership, although I understand the reluctance to use leadership as one of the competencies, I'm convinced that that can be changed to say willingness to participate in bringing about change where it's appropriate. So that little cluster of problem solving and agents of change is a competency, and where should that best go? So perhaps that's something to deal with when you're trying to boil down the current 6 competencies into the rubric. So I don't know if that's the way to express what I'm trying to get at, but put it as footnotes to see how best to assign it in a later session.
Thank you, Peter. Tamara?
So I wanted to circle back to the idea of people were talking about changing ethical to global citizen. And I actually would not recommend that, because you can still put global citizen, environmental stewardship under ethical. And the reason I'm concerned about changing that is because ethical, if you make that global citizen, you're removing the local ethical part. We don't want people just to be outwardly ethical in global situations, but we also want them to be ethical in local situations. And we have a lot of ethics issues at the high school level that we are trying to address. So every day, really. So I would strongly hesitate to change your ethical. I think folding in both global and local aspects of being ethical would make more sense there.
And that reflects some of the original conversation, was that people liked ethical because it was broader and applied to, one-to-one individual interaction. It applied to things like, do I cheat on this test? It applies to, all kinds of interactions, including, how we interact with the environment and the ethics of that, and how we look at national and global issues. So that's why it ended up ethical in the first place, and trying again to weave some of those other concepts under. Terry and Lorenzo, your hand's still up. I don't know if you want to speak again or whether that was a leftover. But Terry, go ahead.
Sorry, I think I was left over.
As I look at this process, I think we're doing a good job. And I think what you really need to do is get on with it, because after you've lived with this for about a year, you're going to come back and say, we really nailed it on 4 of those 6 competencies. And there are things that we need to say in addition that need to apply to the 2 that we didn't nail it on. But only through practice and using this thing are you really going to learn some of those lessons about what needs to happen next. So I'm hoping that this is a living process. It's a living document. You're gonna fly this thing off the carrier or the aircraft carrier, and you're going to learn an awful lot as a result of that first year of work. And at that point, you'll be able to do some revisions that'll make all the difference in the world, and it'll make something that's very good even better.
Agreed. Thank you, Terry. And Amy.
Similar to what Terry just said, I think there were a lot of really important things that were mentioned as sub-ideas, whether it was DEI or social emotional wellness, that are very future-oriented and will be important to our students. So I would love, and I'm sure you're doing this, Michael, if we can just note those and make sure that we weave them into each of the the one-pagers as we work on them.
Yep. And as each group was reporting, I was looking at their document and making sure that what they were saying verbally was reflected there, and adding my own notes where I didn't, so that I had those as notes.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm not hearing a strong movement to change any of our 6, but rather hearing feedback about things we would like sort of included in them. Is that something everyone can live with? Okay. So, Chrissy, if we can move on to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about next steps, and it will address a number of the things that we just talked about. And I hope that's large enough for you to see, but I'll run through them. So our next steps are these are big picture next steps for us, and sort of in the order that we plan to tackle them. So the first is, once we, now that we kind of have agreed, we'll probably do a little bit of work on the 1-sentence descriptors, and then we will begin to kind of roll this out with our students, our staff, and community, just sheerly as an awareness thing about what is our graduate profile, what is the purpose of our graduate profile, what are our competencies. And so it's really more of just kind of a PR sort of rollout. And then as I mentioned, step 2 is we're going to have clearly defined specific indicators for each one of the competencies. So that would be a bulleted list, like we've been talking about, that more definitively kind of lists what would be considered sort of sub skills or competency for each one. Once we have that, we'll begin to think about, okay, how do we assess this? And how do we, as I've mentioned many times in these meetings, I think it's incredibly important that we have students self-assess their achievement of the competencies and look for evidence that they have achieved these competencies, and that it's embedded into our curriculum. So that moves us into, and I see step 3 with the means to assess coming in the form of rubrics. So once we have kind of the sub kind of breakdown of each competency and the more discrete descriptors, that would yield rubrics that are tied to those. So that would be step 3. And then we want to have our teachers look at it either by content, whether science or social studies, or even course-specific definitions of what the competencies and indicators look like within that context. So that our teachers are looking at, okay, so how does the concept of empathy play itself out in a math class? Which I don't know math well enough to kind of define that, but I want our teachers to kind of grapple with that and figure out what it looks like in their own academic context. And then long term, we need to start thinking about, okay, if we're saying these are the most important things, how do we actually teach these competencies? How do we embed instruction around them? Not just tell students, this is what we expect of you. This is the rubric by which you're going to be assessed. Now do it. We don't do that with any of our other academic content. We figure out what we want our students to learn and be able to do. We figure out how we're going to assess it. And then we figure out how we're going to teach them to meet that expectation. And I believe we need to do the exact same thing with these competencies. Then, that's all kind of foundational work and ultimately we have ongoing instruction and regular assessment kind of throughout the students' 4 years with us of how we develop these competencies and how we're doing with helping students achieve these competencies. And then I'm very interested in exploring the possibility of a culminating event or task that students would do as part of their senior year, whereby they demonstrate mastery of our competencies. So big picture, those are kind of some of the steps we're going to take. You will notice, and I very intentionally did not include timelines associated with any of these. We created some timelines for these last spring and into the summer as part of our strategic plan. And we did that with the assumption that this year was going to be more normal. And we have learned that this year is not normal. We anticipated it would be much more normal for our students. It would be more normal, particularly for our staff, and it's not. Our staff is working double time because they're having to adjust their curriculum. They're having to adjust their instructional strategies because kids are coming back out of essentially a year and almost a half of doing online learning. And there are things that we're having to reteach, and quite honestly, asking our leaders and our teachers to take on this task on top of everything else they're doing right now. We just simply can't ask them to do that. So we're going back, revisiting those timelines and figuring out what can we do kind of at the district level to make some progress here without asking more of our teachers and our staff at this point. So that's why there are not timelines attached to them, but I wanted you to have a sense of kind of where we're going over the long term. And I've spent time over the last year talking with other school districts and schools that are 3 and 4 years ahead of us in this process of developing a graduate profile. And most of them are just now getting to kind of looking at what does this look like in the classroom, that they really stress that you need to invest the time in really kind of detailed planning and thinking and developing really good descriptors and rubrics before you start doing it. And to Terry's point, you learn and adapt a lot as you're implementing and need to make a lot of changes. So that's kind of our big picture next step plans. Greg, do you have a comment?
Comments, those questions in terms of since you're saying timeline, we've got some time to build on this. Are we involving student perspective in terms of similarly of the activity that you did with us tonight to get their wordsmithing and their perspectives and values of what they see for their perspective in graduation?
Yeah, so our design team actually had about 20% of our design team was students. when we created the competencies and the descriptors. We don't have any here with us tonight, so I think that's a gap that we need to go back and fill. And some of our people who were students have graduated, so we need to kind of backfill those. And we do still have some students with us who were on the design team and didn't join us tonight. So I think revisiting with them and getting some fresh faces would be important. Liz?
Yes, thank you. So my question is, what are the plans to roll this out to the parents? How much parent engagement are you anticipating or hoping for? Because clearly having parents be supportive of the school and vice versa will make this very successful for our students.
Yeah, so that has to be a key part of, I think all three of our key constituencies, our students, our staff, and our broader, when I say community, I say that both including our parents as well as our broader community beyond families who have students in our schools currently. I think obviously students, staff, and parents are the most important of those. The community outside of our school is probably a little bit lesser importance, but so I think we need to have parent engagement in this. I think that as part of the next steps, particularly step 2, where we're talking about clearly defined specific indicators, I want to have parents, students, and staff involved in that. And that may be something that I'm reaching out to members of this group. And I think we will need to revisit adding some more people to this group based on our turnout tonight, to kind of get engaged with doing that work. So I think it's both an outward communication as well as having parents participate in further development of this concept. Okay. Any other questions?
Just a quick one so that I understand. So when we talk about next steps, the first one on here, while I'm 100% in agreement with you that we need to rethink the timing to make sure that we don't over pressure anyone, now that we have at least our group has defined this is what we believe are the core competencies for it, do we think we'll be able to do the first step in the next semester so we can start really getting out the word of what this is and start, even if we don't move very far or very fast, at least it starts getting people thinking about it and the juice is kind of flowing to think about ideas and ways to move forward with this, right?
Yeah, I would say that steps 1 and 2 are definitely part of the work that I think we can accomplish this year, and maybe even getting into step 3, because I don't see that as I don't see those as being heavy impact or could potentially have very little to virtually none on our teachers, other than asking a small number of teachers if they just kind of want to help with this. But once we get into step 4, that's when it becomes heavy teacher involvement. And so I want to steer clear of that.
Yeah, but I am worried about not just the teachers, but all of our staff. So I do want to make sure that they have the bandwidth to support this.
Yep, agreed.
There's something very similar to this in WASC. Student learner outcomes have to be revised and developed each WASC cycle. I feel like this committee is doing some of that work. So much of this will transfer, and that WASC process requires total staff involvement in the process of development of those different goals and action plans. So there is a mechanism whereby this will feed into another process that is related to our accreditation as a educational institution.
Yep. Okay. So in terms of a very specific next step, Carrie and I will take your feedback. We will make an update to our actual document. We have a we had a graphic designer work on a kind of one-page visual that we never ended up being super thrilled with. So I've changed graphic designers, and we will have that kind of result. And once we have a one-page sort of graphic design, I will share that with all of you so that you can see the product before we roll it out publicly. Okay, well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time and thank you all for joining us tonight and for participating in all your input. Some of you have been with us from the start, and some of you are new to this, but that's part of this process, is inviting new people in and bringing some institutional memory to this process as well. So thank you all very much, and have a good evening and a great Thanksgiving holiday next week.
Thank you. Happy
You
Thanksgiving.
guys,
everyone.
all of you for participating.
Happy
and
Thanksgiving.
yep. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Take care.